Over the last few years, I've seen numerous threads asking similar questions in the Homelab subreddit. What is a Homelab, and what do you do with all this server hardware? With the variety and range of scope in what a Homelab can be, it's oftentimes easy to get it confused with self-hosting, or just easy to mistake it with hoarding old hardware. For those of you who may have this question or have debated starting a lab and want more information on where to start and how to go about this, well, you've come to the right place. So what I would like to do today is circle back on that fundamental question. What is a Homelab, and what is it for? One thing I want to add. This isn't me trying to gatekeep what is or isn't labbing. This is just my opinion, and I'm just trying to draw a line around what this hobby is, why it's beneficial, and what the purpose is. Hopefully this will help you decide if a lab is for you, or if you have one, help you make decisions on how you structure your lab and what you put in it versus what you decide not to. If I had to put a definition on it, a home lab is a personal environment that you set up for experimenting, learning, and testing with different technology. From hardware to software, from enterprise to open source. The scope of what's in your lab can truly only be defined by you and what you seek to learn and what your goals are within the lab. Where a lab differentiates from something like self-hosting that I was talking about earlier is that labs are for experimenting. By design, these are environments where you're meant to break things. You will make mistakes. You will try things that do and don't work for the sake of learning. It's almost certain that at some point in building your lab, you will end up blurring these lines, and that's okay, but it's just important to keep those risk boundaries in the back of your mind when you're deciding where you want to blur those lines. It's this fundamental aspect of labbing that makes it such an important tool for career development. More on that in a minute. But it is also one of the biggest pitfalls that people who are new to labbing make. For some users, labbing with networking equipment can be a great way to practice with VLANs, subnets, and routing. But if you decide to do this on the switch that's responsible for your home network, you run the risk of taking down the whole network if you accidentally nuke your config. Another example, maybe you want to self-host a way to track all the IP addresses for your lab. If you host this on the same system that you're actively labbing on, it's now within the risk boundary of that host. So if you break that server or do something to break the networking connectivity to that service, it will no longer be available. In this example, that may be acceptable as the purpose of this, this service is for the lab. So it being down only impacts the lab. Now, say that instead of something like Netbox, we were hosting Pi-hole or a DHCP server, something fundamental to the networking connectivity of your home. If you're running this on the same host, suddenly that host going down may affect the entire networking connectivity of your home. This is where you have to decide if the risk is outweighed by the benefits. When building your first lab until you're comfortable with the host operating system that you elect to use and understand the impact of the services that you're running, I recommend keeping core networking functionality off of your hosts for your lab, or on a separate host that you minimize changes on, although at some point you may want to experiment with these core network functions as well. Having a good backup strategy or a plan B should something break can come in clutch. I'll explore all of these pitfalls in a future video, so stay tuned for that. But circle back to a question here. So what actually constitutes a lab? Again, a lab can be anything. Virtual machines running on an old laptop to a stack of networking switches so that you can train for your CCENT certification. Even a whole rack of enterprise-grade servers running in clusters. The scale is entirely up to you, your needs, and goals. How you design your environment should match the way that you best learn. Don't be afraid to just start with extra hardware that you already have on hand to test and learn. You can even use something like VMware Workstation or VirtualBox to get started, and just use the machine that you already daily drive. If you're pursuing a career in IT, or are just looking to have a place to further develop the skills in your current role, there's no better place to do so than in a lab environment. While some employers may provide such an environment, it is not commonplace. And when it comes to supporting, troubleshooting, or building infrastructure, there is simply no replacement for practice and experience. Additionally, when interviewing for IT jobs, it has become a common question for interviewers to ask if you already have a home lab or any external IT projects. Having a home lab is a great way to show that you have a passion for technology that extends beyond the 9-to-5 grind, as well as increase your exposure to things that you may not see in your current role, but that may be relevant. For example, I was supporting Active Directory domains at my first 2 IT roles, but I'd never had the opportunity to build one. So setting up a lab to build some domains and make some mistakes along the way was a great way to practice and experience before eventually I did have to support standing up a new environment in the workplace. This is an experience that you have total control over, and sometimes breaking the hard and fast rule of the hobby is where the best experience lies. Other times, it may be a pain point that makes the hobby not enjoyable at all. You have to tailor the experience to your goals. So what do I mean? Well, rather than tell you whether you should or shouldn't have a lab, instead let me pose the question, why do you want one? Setting a clear goal of what you're looking to learn or what you want to build and what the risk boundaries are within those goals can greatly improve your experience. For example, if your goal is just to host a media server, you're not looking for an operating system that necessarily has the strongest virtual machine support, but rather you may value a simple OS with a native app store that supports the applications that you want to run. And you're less likely to want things like high availability or other enterprise level features. Conversely, if you're trying to emulate an environment that you have at work or you have a vendor or certificate in mind that you want to train for, choosing their software stack and hardware that is recommended for those platforms will be drastically different than the first example. In the early days that I decided I wanted to lab, I had graduated from college and was working an entry-level IT job at a small bank. There's a problem with small business environments. More often than not, there is little to no room for admins to break things or learn as they go. These environments are far more susceptible to the cost of mistakes. As such, my permissions in the environment and therefore my ability to see and learn the inner workings of the infrastructure were limited. And while the senior admins tried to get me more exposure and shoulder surfing time, watching the administration that they were doing, it was very clear to me that the rate that I wanted to continue my education and skill development was going to outpace what this environment could provide. This is when I decided I would get my hands on some old gear and practice some of the software and concepts that I saw in the environment. So I went online and found a Dell server for sale. I picked up a Dell R710 for about $200. I loaded it into a server rack that I put together from some extra 2x4s in the garage, and while I had no to little plan, I did have a goal. I wanted to learn the hardware and software that we used at work. This meant tearing down this R710 and understanding what made it different from a normal PC, as I'd never seen the inside of a server before. It also meant some mistakes along the way. Learning about ECC RAM compatibility and the lack of support from server manufacturers on certain operating systems. This is also where I reached out to the admins that I worked with and asked, what are we using on these servers? What software is important to the daily operations of our business that we're responsible for? Quickly, this opened up a rabbit hole. Next thing I knew, I was installing VMware, building a Windows domain, laying out group policies. Then I would experiment with user accounts and permissions until I finally broke something, realized I needed backups, needed to build a backup server. So here's where I want to circle back to that Reddit thread. In this first lab that I built, I wasn't even running the most up-to-date version of VMware because I was trying to emulate the environment that I was trying to learn. And I think it's perfectly valid to have that mindset when you're building out your lab. I don't think that everyone needs to be running the same software stacks, but simply by outlining what it is that you're seeking to learn, you can decide what software is right for you. Proxmox and Docker are great places to start if you're just trying to self-host applications, or if you're looking for a career in DevOps, or if you've never worked with a hypervisor before. But if you're trying to emulate an enterprise environment using software that you might actually see in those environments, such as VMware or Hyper-V, might be a valid choice for you as well. Where I get frustrated is users being shut down because they want to run something that you would see in an enterprise environment just because it's not ideal for a home lab. I think that fundamentally is a flawed way to look at what a home lab is. It is for learning. Sometimes when it comes to labbing, doing things the wrong way is the best way. And what might be the right decision for you might not make sense to everyone else. For example, if you're just looking to get some practice for a CCNA certification, getting a power-hungry, old, end-of-life enterprise switch for practicing networking on might be the right choice. However, if you're going to try and put that switch into production to actually manage your home network, maybe you do want something more modern, more expensive, and more efficient. Hardware selection is an entire topic of its own, and one that I do intend to circle back to, but suffice to say, your decisions and what makes sense for you might not be what matches everyone else's expectations or standards. So let's talk about setting expectations. It's important to remember that home labs don't require your time, but what you get out of it will be directly correlated to the amount of time that you put in. Learning is a time investment, and you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to break. You're going to buy the wrong hardware for the job at least once, and this field is ever changing. New hardware, new software come out all the time. Entire industries have come and gone within this field, and therefore the purpose of your lab is likely to change. That's all part of the fun, but it's not for everyone. When deciding if this is for you, I recommend that you ask yourself when you're going to block time to work on this, what your planned budget is, and what are the things that you are seeking to learn. If you're just looking for a solution for media, running a Plex server for you and your friends, and you're more concerned with consuming that curated content than you are about learning Linux commands, then maybe labbing isn't exactly what you're looking for. But if this sounds interesting to you, learning how technology works, building skills in software development or automation, or just playing with hardware, because let's admit it, it's fun, well, the door is open, friend. Come on in.